The invitation that changed everything. Keanu Reeves was known for many things: his kindness, his calm nature, and his ability to stay grounded in a world filled with flashing cameras and loud applause. But no one, not even his closest friends, could have guessed where he would be sitting one late spring morning, backstage at the Vatican Media Hall, waiting for a live broadcast to begin. It wasn't a film promotion or a charity fundraiser. It was something entirely different. He had been invited by the newly elected Pope Robert Prevost, an invitation so mysterious, so unexpected, that it made Keanu pause for days before accepting. It had all started 2 weeks earlier, when Keanu received a hand-delivered letter at his quiet home in the Hollywood Hills. The envelope was simple, cream-colored and stamped with the seal of the Vatican. He opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a personal note from Pope Robert himself. The message was short, but full of humility. Dear Mr. Reeves, I've seen the quiet strength in your heart. Would you honor me with a conversation that the world can witness? Not about fame, but about faith, forgiveness, and what truly saves us. Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. He wasn't a man who wore his beliefs on his sleeve. In fact, most people assumed he didn't talk about faith at all. But something about the Pope's words struck a chord deep inside him. He thought about the loss of his daughter, the death of his beloved Jennifer, the many silent nights when he sat in grief, whispering questions to the stars with no one to answer. Maybe, just maybe, this meeting could be something more than a conversation. Maybe it could be a healing moment for millions. The plane to Rome was quiet. No cameras, no handlers, no reporters. Just Keanu in a hoodie, carrying a worn-out journal and a heart full of questions. He arrived at the Vatican under tight but respectful security. Even the guards treated him not as a celebrity, but as a guest of honor. Inside, Pope Robert waited, with the same calm energy that Keanu carried. Both men greeted each other not with fanfare but with a gentle handshake and a look that said, "I see you." The media room had been transformed into a peaceful space. No gold, no extravagant symbols, just 2 chairs, a wooden table, and a large stained glass window that let the morning light pour in. The cameras were hidden, quiet, waiting for the moment to begin. And when the red light blinked on, signaling that the world was watching, neither man changed their posture. It felt like a private conversation even though millions were tuning in. The interviewer asked the first question. Mr. Reeves, you've faced tremendous loss in your life, yet you continue to carry yourself with grace. How do you do it? Keanu didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes for a second as if searching not for the perfect words but for the truth. I think grace finds you when you stop trying to be strong all the time, he said softly. There were nights when I didn't want to wake up, nights when I hated the world, hated myself, but then someone would show me a small kindness, a smile, a sandwich, even silence, and it reminded me that maybe the world wasn't against me. Maybe I just needed to listen more. Maybe grace whispers. Pope Robert nodded, eyes kind but unreadable. And did you ever feel that God was with you during those moments? Keanu looked down, his fingers tightening slightly. I don't know, he said after a moment. Sometimes I felt nothing. Sometimes I felt like I was screaming into a cave. But once, years ago, I was walking past a church on Christmas Eve. I wasn't going in. I just stopped because the choir was singing. And a woman, a stranger, walked up to me and handed me a candle. She didn't say anything. She just smiled and walked in. I stood there for 20 minutes with that candle in my hand, listening. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel saved. Just not alone. The room was silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. The Pope didn't speak right away. He simply placed his hand gently on the table and leaned forward. Sometimes not feeling alone is the first step toward feeling loved, he said. As the conversation deepened, they spoke about forgiveness, not just of others, but of oneself. Pope Robert shared a story of a man who came to confession after abandoning his family decades earlier, only to realize he had never forgiven himself. Keanu nodded, his eyes distant but clear. We carry shame like bricks in a bag, he said. Sometimes we forget we can just set the bag down. The audience around the world watched in silence. Many had expected a formal discussion about religion. What they got instead was something much more human, more honest. Two men, both wounded by life, searching together for meaning, and then came the unexpected turn. The interviewer leaned in, reading from a card. Mr. Reeves, we've heard rumors that you've been secretly donating to orphanages and hospices in multiple countries, never taking credit. Is that true? Keanu blinked, clearly not expecting the question. He glanced at the Pope, who gave a small, knowing smile. It's not about me, Keanu replied. Those places. They helped me once. Not the buildings, but the people inside. A nurse who didn't ask for my name. A child who gave me a drawing. It wasn't charity. It was gratitude. Just then, a young boy was quietly led into the room. He held a handmade card, nervously stepping toward Keanu. The camera zoomed out to respect the moment, but the entire world could see the boy's trembling hands. Pope Robert stood, guiding the child gently. This is Emilio, he said, softly. He's from one of those homes you helped. He has something he wants to say. The boy looked up, voice shaking. Thank you for the books. Thank you for the pencils. You gave me the chance to dream. Keanu knelt down, his voice barely a whisper. No. Thank you for reminding me why we live. The audience watching online exploded with emotion. Comments poured in from all corners of the globe. Tears, prayers, messages of hope. But as Keanu returned to his seat, the interviewer paused, holding one last question in his hand. Mr. Reeves, there's a reason Pope Robert invited you today. And it's something the world deserves to hear. Keanu raised an eyebrow, unsure, and Pope Robert looked directly into the camera, his voice calm and steady. What this man shared with me in private, he said, changed how I understand the power of silence, loss, and healing. Keanu turned, confused. The Pope continued, Keanu, would you tell them what you told me about the girl in the hospital? The one who changed everything? And at that moment, the entire room froze, because no one, not even Keanu, expected that story to come up. The story he never told. The room seemed to lose all sound as Pope Robert's words echoed through the quiet space. Even the gentle hum of the recording equipment faded into the background. Keanu Reeves, known for his calm poise even under pressure, suddenly looked as if someone had reached into a part of him he rarely, if ever, let others see. His hands tightened slightly in his lap and his eyes shifted to the floor as if looking for something he'd buried long ago. It was not the question itself that unsettled him. It was the memory it summoned. The girl. The hospital. The moment he had tucked away in the deepest corner of his soul. For several seconds, Keanu didn't speak. He leaned forward, elbows resting, on his knees, and inhaled slowly as though trying to balance the weight of what was about to unfold. The Pope said nothing more. He didn't press or urge. He simply watched with a kind of stillness that gave permission, not pressure. The interviewer placed his question cards on the table and folded his hands, signaling that this part of the conversation was beyond any script. Keanu finally began speaking, his voice quieter now, more reflective. Years ago, he said slowly, I was filming overseas. I won't say where because I don't want anyone looking into the girl's life, but it was a hard time for me. I had just lost someone I loved. I was angry at life. I was surviving, but I wasn't really living. And one night during a storm, our car passed by a small hospital. We weren't supposed to stop, but something told me to get out. I told the driver I'd catch up later. I just walked into the hospital with no reason. His eyes glazed over, not with tears, but with memory so sharp it almost hurt to recount. I didn't even know where I was going. I just followed the sound of laughter. It was the only warm sound in that cold place. And that's when I found her. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10. Bald from treatment, eyes far too wise for her age. She was drawing on the wall with crayons. Someone had allowed her to turn her hospital room into her own art gallery. Flowers, suns, angels, superheroes. It was like walking into a dream that was fighting to stay alive. Keanu paused, his throat tightening, but he kept going, as though the act of speaking the story was as much for him as it was for the world listening. She looked up at me and said, "Are you lost too?" And I just nodded. I didn't know what else to say. We ended up talking for over an hour. She didn't ask me who I was. She didn't care that I was an actor. To her, I was just a man who looked like he needed to be reminded that life still had meaning. His gaze lifted slightly, focused on nothing in particular, like someone watching a scene play out on a screen only he could see. Before I left, she gave me a drawing. It was a picture of two people holding hands under a big tree. And she said, "This is where you go when the world gets too loud. Promise me you'll go there sometimes." And I promised her. I didn't think much of it then. But a few weeks later, I found out she had passed away. He took a deep breath, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was sacred. "I kept that drawing," he said softly. "Still have it. I framed it. And every time the world starts to crush me again, I look at it. Not because it's sad, but because she gave me a gift without asking for anything in return. And that more than any role I've played, any award I've been given, that's what made me want to live again." The Pope's voice was gentle when he finally spoke. "The world remembers saints by their miracles. But sometimes, the real miracles are quiet. They come in the form of a child's voice, a stranger's kindness, a moment shared in silence. What you experienced wasn't a coincidence. It was grace in disguise." The interviewer wiped his eyes and tried to keep his voice steady as he asked, "Why have you never shared this before?" Keanu's answer came with no hesitation. "Because it wasn't about me. It was her story, and I didn't want the world to twist it into something shallow. But now, maybe the world needs her story more than it needs another interview." The impact of his words was immediate. Across social media, clips of the story went viral within minutes. People from around the world began sharing their own experiences of unexpected kindness, of children who had taught them to believe again. Messages poured in. Nurses, doctors, parents, even strangers, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for reminding us of what really matters." But the story didn't end there. As the live interview continued, the Pope reached into a folder beside him and pulled out a photograph. He passed it to Keanu, who took it carefully, his expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment. It was a scan of the very drawing the little girl had given him. Two figures under a tree, one tall and one small, hands joined, sunlight above them. But there was more. In the corner of the photo was a note written in the girl's handwriting that Keanu had never seen before. "For the man who looks like a hero but talks like a friend, when you find your tree, leave a flower for me." Keanu stared at it in disbelief. How do you have this?" he whispered. Pope Robert gave a knowing smile. "The hospital preserved some of her art. When I visited as a cardinal years ago, I kept a few pieces that touched my heart. I never imagined one of them would find its way back to the person it was meant for." Keanu held the photograph like it was made of glass, tears now quietly welling in his eyes. This is her handwriting," he said, voice cracking. "This is real." And then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, the Pope leaned forward and said something that made the entire audience lean in as well. "Keanu, what if your life wasn't meant to entertain millions, but to heal a few?" Keanu didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes told the world that something inside him had shifted forever. Just as the cameras were about to cut to a break, the Pope made one final statement. Simple, yet earth-shaking. "Next week," he said, "we are unveiling a new initiative for children battling illness, and we would be honored if you, Keanu, would help us name it after the little girl who helped you remember how to live." And just like that, a moment that began as a formal interview turned into a mission, a silent promise, a spark of something far greater than fame or recognition. But what no one in the room knew, not the interviewer, not even the Pope, was that Keanu had been hiding a letter in his pocket the entire time. A letter he had written to the girl years ago but never sent. And that letter was about to become the key to what came next. The letter he never sent. As the broadcast transitioned to a quiet pause, the cameras temporarily shifted to still frames of the Vatican skyline. The interview was not over, but the world needed a moment to breathe, and so did Keanu Reeves. Behind the scenes, in the soft hum of the studio lights, the air was still thick with the weight of what had just unfolded. Keanu sat in silence, the photo of the girl's drawing still in his hand, the note scribbled in her unmistakable handwriting etched into his mind like a whisper from the past. Beside him, Pope Robert gave him space, knowing some journeys must be walked alone even when the whole world is watching. Keanu reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from memory. He pulled out an envelope folded and worn, the edges frayed from being carried too many times. It had no name on it, no address, just a simple pressed flower inside, long since, dried but carefully preserved between layers of transparent wax paper. He unfolded the letter, and as he looked at the handwriting, his own years ago, raw and unsure, he felt the quiet pain of an old wound that had never been spoken aloud. "Wrote this," he said, barely above a whisper. "The night I found out she was gone. I didn't know who to send it to. I didn't even know her last name. So I kept it. And every year, on the same day, I would take it out, read it again, and wonder if anyone ever knew what she meant to me." The Pope turned toward him gently. "You have the power now to share that meaning, not just with her memory, but with the world." Keanu gave a small nod. "Then let me read it." The cameras returned to the live feed, and once again the world tuned in. But this time there were no questions, no scripted transitions, just a man with a fragile piece of paper and a heart finally ready to speak. He unfolded the letter with care, placed the flower gently on the table, and began to read. "Dear Dreamer, under the tree, I don't know your name. I wish I had asked, but maybe if I had, this would have felt more like a goodbye than a beginning. That night you gave me a drawing, I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the kind that shouts or demands to be seen, but the quiet kind, the kind that waits. You didn't ask me to smile. You didn't ask me to be strong. You just drew a place where peace lived and asked me to visit it when life got too loud. I've gone there more times than I can count. And every time I picture you still drawing, still dreaming, still laughing in colors the world doesn't know how to name." He paused briefly, his voice cracking but steady. "I never got the chance to tell you that you saved me, not with medicine, not with therapy, with crayons, with kindness, with the belief that even someone like me, drowning in grief, could still sit beneath a tree and feel the sun on his face. I carry your drawing with me wherever I go. Sometimes I wonder if you knew what you were giving me. Maybe you did. Maybe you always knew more than the rest of us." He folded the letter slowly, placing it back into the envelope. For a moment, the silence in the room became sacred once again. Even the millions watching online seemed to hold their collective breath as if afraid any noise would break the delicate spell. "What was her name?" the interviewer asked softly. Keanu shook his head. "I still don't know. They only called her Mia. I don't know if that was her real name or just a nickname. But to me, Mia meant more than most names ever could." Pope Robert leaned forward, then his eyes clear but deeply emotional. "There are moments in life when a single act of kindness echoes louder than the loudest sermon. You have carried that echo with dignity and humility, Keanu. Perhaps now it's time to give her story a place to live forever." "That's why I came here," Keanu said. "Not for publicity, not for any interview. I came because I've spent years quietly helping where I could, donating in her honor, building libraries, creating safe spaces for kids with nowhere to go. But I've always done it in secret. Maybe it's time to stop hiding behind the silence. Maybe it's time to let the world meet Mia." The Pope smiled, and for the first time, a spark of excitement shimmered through his calm demeanor. "Then, let us build something together. A living memory, a global project in her name." Keanu nodded, his voice gaining strength. "I want to build a sanctuary, a place where sick children can create, draw, sing, dream. A place filled with music, art, books, laughter. A place where hope is louder than pain. And I want to call it Mia's tree. The announcement sent waves across the globe. Media outlets scrambled to confirm details. Hashtags like Najk Mia's dream and Maj Mia's tree began trending in dozens of countries. People who had lost children, parents, siblings began sharing stories of quiet acts of grace that had helped them heal. Artists began posting drawings of trees with children playing beneath them. Musicians composed songs in her honor. In a world often divided by anger and noise, a moment of pure kindness had become a movement. But in the midst of all this hope, a quiet voice of tension entered the picture. A journalist, known for his skepticism of celebrity philanthropy, interrupted the momentum with a bold and slightly confrontational question during a press follow-up just hours later. "Mr. Reeves, how do we know this isn't just another emotional marketing stunt? Why wait all these years? Why now?" The crowd tensed, and for a moment it seemed the magic of the interview might unravel. But Keanu didn't flinch. He looked at the reporter calmly, his gaze firm but kind. "Because pain takes time," he said. "Because healing doesn't happen on a schedule. And because sometimes the world needs a reminder that not everything done quietly is done selfishly. Some things are whispered because they matter too much to be shouted." The Pope placed a gentle hand on Keanu's shoulder. "Faith is not about being seen, it's about being true." But the confrontation sparked something deeper. As the world continued to celebrate the announcement, a shadow from Keanu's past began to stir. An old acquaintance, a former director he had once worked with, emerged online claiming he knew a secret about Keanu's hospital visit that the world didn't know. He hinted that Keanu had once walked away from a sick child in another hospital years earlier, unable to face her suffering. And the world, hungry for drama, began to dig. Just as Keanu thought he had found peace in Mia's memory, the internet threatened to turn his journey of healing into a scandal. And deep down, Keanu knew this was no misunderstanding. Because the girl from the other hospital, he remembered her too, and he had indeed walked away, but not for the reason anyone thought. The wound behind the silence. The backlash came swiftly, not from the Vatican or from those who had watched the interview with full hearts, but from the dark corners of the internet where skepticism and suspicion often grew louder than truth. An anonymous blog post appeared late that night, written by someone who claimed to have worked with KeanuReeves during the early 2000s. In the post, the writer accused Keanu of being a coward in real life, saying he once abandoned a terminally ill child at a cancer hospital in Los Angeles without even offering her a goodbye. The post went viral within hours. News outlets picked it up. Commentators started asking hard questions. Social media turned from sympathy to speculation. And once again, the narrative began to twist. But Keanu did not respond. Not immediately. Instead, he disappeared from the public, retreating into silence as the world debated his character like it was a courtroom case, inside a small guest house at the edge of Rome, far from the Vatican and cameras. Keanu sat alone with nothing but his journal and the weight of a memory he had spent years trying to forget. The story being told online wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. And now, the moment had come to face the one ghost he had never dared to name aloud. It was over 20 years ago, during a period of Keanu's life when he was filming back-to-back roles, running from grief disguised as work. It was only a few months after Jennifer had passed. His heart was numb, his soul barely functioning. In the middle of filming, a fan letter had arrived, written in crayon, addressed simply to the man from The Matrix. It was from a little girl named Elise, who said the film had made her want to fight like a hero during her chemo treatments. Her parents included a note asking if he might ever visit the hospital. They weren't asking for cameras or attention. They just thought it might lift her spirits. Keanu had folded the letter and kept it in his pocket for a week, debating whether he had anything left in him to give. Finally, one evening just before sundown, he went. He remembered the hallway vividly, the smell of disinfectant, the way the nurses looked surprised, then quietly grateful. They led him to her room, where Elise sat propped up by pillows, pale but smiling, eyes wide with wonder. She was wearing sunglasses, like Trinity from the movie, and holding a plastic spoon like a weapon. He had laughed. They talked for 20 minutes. She asked about the fight scenes. She asked what bullet time felt like. She asked if he ever felt afraid. And then, without warning, she asked him if he believed in angels. Keanu remembered the lump in his throat. He remembered how unprepared he was for that question. He had come to bring joy. He hadn't come to speak about heaven or pain or death. And when she asked if she was going to be okay, he didn't know what to say. He felt panic rise in his chest, shame creeping into his thoughts. So instead of answering, he stood up, told her he needed to step out to grab something from his car, and he never went back. He ran, not out of cruelty, not out of indifference, but because he felt like a fraud. He was still drowning in his own loss, and here was a child facing death with more grace than he could summon. It shattered him, and he couldn't face it. He had carried that regret for years, and now it had returned. As the internet demanded a response, Pope Robert reached out privately. The call was short. He said only this: "The world doesn't need perfection, Keanu. It needs honesty. The path to redemption is not paved with denial, but with truth." Those words echoed through Keanu's heart as he boarded a plane back to Los Angeles. No fanfare. No public statement. No announcement. He went straight to the children's hospital where Elise had once stayed. The same hallway, though updated. New paint. New posters. But the memories were still there. He found a nurse. Older, now, but kind. He asked her if she remembered Elise. The woman's eyes softened. "Of course," she said. She was light, even on her worst days. Keanu told her the truth, that he had left that day without saying goodbye. The nurse nodded, not with judgment but with understanding. "You were broken too," she said gently. "Sometimes the wounded can't hold others, but you did something for her even in those few minutes. She talked about you for days, not because you were famous, but because you listened." Keanu asked if there was anything left, anything from Elise's time there. The nurse disappeared into the back office and returned with a box. Inside was a small folder of drawings. Elise's name was written in colorful stickers on the front. One drawing stood out. Two people flying above a city. One had sunglasses, the other had a sad face but was holding a flower. On the back, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "To the hero who forgot he was one, come back someday." Keanu broke down for the first time in years, not from shame, but from the mercy in her words. Forgiveness offered even before he had asked. The next morning he called Pope Robert. "I want to tell her story too," he said. "She deserves a tree." The Pope agreed. And so, a second sanctuary was planned, this one called Elise's Sky. It would be dedicated to children battling terminal illness, offering both creative and emotional support, and training volunteers to be present with families, not to fix their pain, but to sit with them in it. And still, Keanu knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were still critics, still rumors. But now he had something stronger than defense. He had truth. And from that truth, something unexpected began to happen. One of the journalists who had criticized him most harshly reached out for a private meeting. When they sat down, she confessed that she had lost her brother to cancer at a young age. She had seen so many people promise hope and disappear. "But watching you face it," she said, "watching you come back and admit it, it made me believe people can change." Keanu looked at her and replied, "I didn't change. I remembered." By the time the second interview aired, a follow-up broadcast co-hosted with Pope Robert and held in the new garden built outside the hospital, millions tuned in not to judge but to learn. The message was clear. Healing is not linear. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you run, but what matters is whether you return. As the cameras panned across the garden, children played under the shade of trees planted in Maya's and Elise's names. Their laughter filled the air, light and full of life, and in the center of the garden stood Keanu, surrounded by families, doctors, and children whose names he would never forget. But as the program closed, a small boy tugged on Keanu's sleeve. He handed him a folded note and said, "She told me to give this to you." Confused, Keanu opened the note. It read, "You kept your promise. Now it's time to find the third tree." Keanu's hands began to tremble. He turned to the boy. "Who gave this to you?" The boy simply pointed to the horizon. "A lady in white. She was standing under that tree, but she's gone now." Keanu looked up. There was no one there, but something inside him stirred. A whisper, a call, a door opening, and he knew then without any doubt, his journey was far from over. The third tree. Keanu stood frozen in the garden as the soft laughter of children echoed around him. He gripped the folded note in his hand, the boy's words spinning inside his mind like a riddle from another world. "She told me to give this to you." A woman in white. Under a tree. Gone in an instant. It sounded impossible. Like a fragment of a dream you weren't sure you'd had. But something in that boy's eyes told Keanu this was no accident. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about closure anymore. This was a beginning wrapped in mystery. He slowly walked toward the edge of the garden where the boy had pointed. There was a tree there, tall, older than the others, its bark rough and weathered, roots curling deep into the soil like ancient veins. It wasn't planted recently. This tree had been here for decades. He stood beneath its branches, the leaves rustling gently above, casting moving shadows on the ground like dancing memories. He scanned the area. There was no one. No woman. No sign of anyone at all. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. At the base of the tree, half covered in soil, was a smooth riverstone. He bent down, brushing the dirt away. Carved into the stone, by hand rough and unpolished, were 3 letters. M-E-K. Keanu's heart skipped. He stared at it for a long time. He had never seen this stone before. Never mentioned the girls' names publicly. But somehow the initials matched. Mia, Elise, Keanu. He whispered them aloud, and the sound of their names together carried on the wind like a hymn. He didn't sleep that night. Back in his quiet guesthouse room, he sat at the desk staring at the note again. It was simple, but something about it had weight. You kept your promise. Now it's time to find the third tree. But there were only 2. Mia's tree and Elise's sky. Was this symbolic? Was it a place, a person, or was it something even deeper? Part of him wanted to dismiss it, call it coincidence, but another part, deeper, older, wiser, knew better. He had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the universe speaks in symbols. And when it does, you don't ignore it. By morning, he was on a plane to Peru. He hadn't told anyone, not the press, not his team, not even the Pope. But deep in the Amazon jungle, there was an orphanage he had quietly funded years ago. A place so remote, it wasn't marked on most maps. The idea had come from a monk he'd met during a retreat. The monk had said, "If you ever want to leave, something pure behind, build where no one looks." Keanu had paid for the construction, the books, the water system. But he'd never visited. Not once. He had always told himself it was enough to give, but now it felt like something had been calling him there all along. After days of travel, small boats, muddy paths, and hours on foot, he finally reached the edge of the forest clearing. There it stood, a humble structure, made of clay and wood with bright painted windows and drawings from children taped to the doors. Barefoot children ran between trees, laughter bouncing off the leaves. The woman who ran the place, a kind, middle-aged caretaker named Alma, greeted him with wide eyes, shocked but smiling. "You came," she said. "After all these years, you came." "I think I was always meant to," he replied. They sat beneath a thatched canopy where Alma brewed coffee over a wood fire. As they talked, she told him stories of the children, some who had come from impossible situations, some who had never known their parents. "But they all have something in common," she said. "They draw trees. Almost every child who stays here, they draw the same tree." She pulled out a worn binder of drawings. Keanu flipped through them in silence, Page after page the same symbol appeared, a tall tree with wide arms, always standing alone, always reaching upward. But one drawing stopped him cold. It showed a figure standing under the tree, hands outstretched with two glowing children on either side. It was signed with three initials again, MEK. "Where did this come from?" he asked, voice low. "We don't know," Alma said. "It just showed up one day, pinned to the front door. No one saw who left it. But the children said the figure in the picture looked like someone who would protect them." Keanu held the drawing in his hands, trying to understand what was happening. He wasn't a man who believed in easy answers or mystical signs. But this wasn't random. This was a thread, pulling him toward something bigger than himself. He walked through the forest behind the orphanage the next day, searching for silence. Not to be alone, but to listen. And deep in the jungle, he found it. A third tree. It was unlike any other. Massive, ancient. Its roots split a boulder in half, and carved into the bark, barely visible through vines, were the same. Letters again. MEK, the third tree. Not planted. Not built. Not named by him. But waiting, he stood before it as if in front of a cathedral. Not a man looking for fame, but a soul stripped bare, standing in the presence of something sacred. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where it ends and begins." In that moment, an idea bloomed. Not a sanctuary this time, not a building or a project, but something more enduring. He would turn this entire forest into a protected haven, not just for children, but for animals, for nature, for silence. A living monument, untouched, unclaimed. He would call it the Circle of Trees, a space where people from around the world could come not to be entertained but to remember. As he returned to the orphanage to share the idea with Alma, the children surrounded him. One girl tugged his hand. "Can you tell us a story?" She asked. "What kind of story?" he replied. "One where the hero doesn't wear a cape," she said. He knelt down beside her, smiling softly. "I know just the one." That night, as the fire crackled and stars filled the sky, Keanu told them everything. Not about Hollywood, not about the red carpets, but about Mia and Elise, and the promise of trees. And as they listened, wide-eyed and silent, something began to change. Not in the forest, not in the sky, but in Keanu himself. A peace he hadn't known in decades settled over him, not because his pain was gone, but because it had finally found its place. But just as the night faded, Alma returned with an envelope. "This was left for you," she said. No one saw who brought it. It was leaning against the third tree. This morning, Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, grainy, old, but unmistakable. It was a picture of a young girl standing under the third tree, and she was holding the hand of someone who looked exactly like him, decades younger, eyes wide, unaware of the future. Beneath the photo, a line was written in familiar handwriting. "Your journey began here long before you knew. Now, go home." And suddenly, the final piece of the mystery began to fall into place. The path home. The morning sun filtered gently through the thick canopy above as KeanuReeves sat alone beneath the third tree, the strange photograph resting quietly in his lap. Everything around him, the hum of insects, the rustling of distant leaves, the distant laughter of children, seemed to fade as he stared into the eyes of his younger self, captured in the grainy photo. It didn't make sense at first. It was him, unmistakably him, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, standing barefoot beside a little girl beneath this very tree. And yet he had no memory of ever being here as a child. No recollection of the forest, the orphanage, or even the tree. But something deep in his body told a different story. There was a sensation in his chest, a slow, burning recognition that this wasn't a new discovery. It was a return. The night before had stirred something ancient inside him. As he told the children the story of Mia and Elise, he had watched. Their faces light up not with sympathy but with connection. They saw themselves in those girls. They saw strength. And in sharing their stories, something in him had healed. But this photo, that was different. It wasn't healing. It was a question, a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. He turned the photograph over in his hand and read the line again. Your journey began here long before you knew. Now, go home. Go home. But where was home? For so long, Keanu had believed home was a place you built with people you loved. A house, a person, a quiet room where you could finally sleep in peace. But now, with the memories he had uncovered, the sanctuaries he had built and the lives he had touched, he was beginning to understand. Home wasn't a place. It was a moment, a memory, a seed of kindness planted in your soul that grew stronger each time you chose compassion over anger, courage over fear, truth over silence. And maybe, just maybe, this photo was proof that even as a child, he had begun walking this path. Long before fame, long before heartbreak, long before anyone called him a hero, he had already been here. The third tree hadn't just called to him because of the present. It was tied to something much older, something sacred. He stood, carefully, tucking the photo into his journal, and walked slowly back to the orphanage. Alma greeted him with her usual warmth, but he could see a question forming in her eyes. He told her everything, the note, the boy, the tree, the photograph. She listened with the quiet grace of someone who had seen miracles take shape in the most unexpected ways. Maybe this place isn't just something you helped build, she said gently. Maybe this place helped build you. Those words stayed with Keanu for the rest of the day. He spent the following week working with the orphanage, drawing up plans to preserve the land around the third tree. He brought in experts, environmentalists, architects who specialized in sustainable design. He spoke with indigenous leaders from nearby communities asking for their guidance and blessing. His vision was not to dominate the land, but to protect it. He wanted the circle of trees to belong to everyone and no one at the same time. A sacred space where people could come not to forget, but to remember who they were before the world told them to be something else. News of the project spread fast. Unlike before, there was no scandal, no controversy, no questions about motives. Something had changed. The world could feel it. What had started as a single interview between an actor and a pope had now become a global story about memory, redemption, and the quiet revolution of kindness. But there was one more thing Keanu needed to do. He returned to Rome. This time, not for cameras, not for interviews. He walked alone through the narrow stone corridors of the Vatican, escorted quietly to the private gardens where Pope Robert often prayed. The Pope stood beneath a fig tree, his hands clasped gently in front of him. When he turned and saw Keanu, his face lit up not with surprise but with the serenity of someone who had been waiting. You found it, the Pope said. I think it found me, Keanu replied. They walked in silence for several minutes before Keanu spoke again. I want to create one more space, not in my name, not in Mia's or Elise's, but in memory of everyone who ever showed kindness in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Pope Robert smiled. Then it must not be built of stone or wood, Keanu nodded. No, it will be a day. And so together, they began planning something entirely new. A world day of quiet kindness. A day where people across the globe would perform a single anonymous act of compassion without seeking praise, likes, or recognition. No selfies. No headlines. Just human beings helping one another in the shadows of their ordinary lives. Schools, businesses, and communities around the world pledged to join. Charities launched initiatives. Social media platforms agreed to mute all trending hashtags for 24 hours, creating a digital silence to match the spirit of the day. The first day of quiet kindness launched exactly 1 year after Keanu's interview with Pope Robert. And, on that day in cities, villages, and homes across the globe, something extraordinary happened. A man in Tokyo left his umbrella over a stranger's bike. A woman in Brazil bought lunch for a homeless family and left before they could thank her. A child in Kenya gave her shoes to a barefoot classmate. And in a small village in Peru beneath the third tree, a group of children gathered around a fire and drew pictures of angels under branches. They didn't know who KeanuReeves was, but they knew the story of Mia and Elise. They knew what it meant to plant kindness and let it grow. And somewhere, beneath a sky filled with stars, Keanu sat with his journal open, the old drawing from Mia tucked inside, and a letter to Elise pressed against his heart. He didn't need a stage or applause. He didn't need cameras or cheers. He had walked through grief, through guilt, through silence, and now he had come home, not to a house, not to a place, but to himself. Before the fire burned out, he tore a single page from his journal and wrote a final note. To anyone reading this, the world will try to make you louder, stronger, faster, but never forget the power of quiet. It is in the quiet that we remember what matters most, and it is in kindness that we find the way back to each other. He folded the paper, placed it in a jar, and buried it at the base of the third tree, not for others to find, but to leave something behind.